is it attempt to do a heist? Do you do a heist? Do you do a heist, or do you don't make a heist? Do a heist? Hello, my name's Rebecca Richardson, but most people call me Becky, and today we're kind of doing a review. So basically I said I was only going to talk about, like, actually in a standalone video, books that are new out, because they're obviously the things that people are more interested in seeing about. But I just finished reading a series that's been out for like years, I believe now, and for like ever people have been saying you should read it, you should read this series, it would be great. And for ages I was like no, because I don't usually read outside of like one author, but I do now, and I was like, hey, maybe now is the time. And so I did. I picked up the series, and now I'm sat here like, why didn't I pick it up earlier? Why didn't I pick it up when it came out? Why did I wait this long? Everybody was right, I'm stupid, that's what we've learned here. Basically, I liked it so much that I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna kind of like review it anyway. But this is less of a review because, like I said, everybody's read this, nobody needs a review of it, but it's more of me just ranting about how much I enjoyed this series. And that series I'm talking about is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Everybody told me to read these books, and I was like, no, I won't, I'll just like keep reading Cassandra Clare for the rest of my life. And then I finally picked them up, and like so good. Like, I would say these are my new obsession. Like, I read a lot of books, but not all of them make it to that point where I think about them regularly. And then the night I finished Crooked Kingdom, I found myself awake at night just thinking about random little things, and I was like, yeah, you know what, yeah, we've reached that point. This better just start a whole new Tumblr side blog for this, which I haven't done yet, but like, maybe. Like I said, this is less of a review and more of me just ranting about how much I like these books. So if you're looking for like critique, this isn't for that. Like, I think there's maybe like 2 points I'm gonna mention at some point that are like a little bit negative, but I could find so few flaws in these books. Whether that's because I don't really like read with a critical eye, I don't look for things to critique when I write, it's just kind of, if the only negative points I mention are things that like pop out at me. So there quite possibly is other things to talk about, but like I can like think of 2 slight things that I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's like, you know, that could have been better, but that's it. So I think for this I'm going to discuss the 2 books separately first, and then I'm going to talk about what I liked about each of the main characters, and then I'll kind of give some overall thoughts at the end. So first, of course, we're talking about Six of Crows, the first book in the duology. This one is definitely my favourite out of the 2. This book follows 6 criminals as they attempt to break into a highly secure government facility in a mythical, fictitious country called Fjerda. The aim is to recover a man who's being held captive there, and in reward they will be given 30 million kruj, which is the currency, so 30 million quid. A lot of the story focuses on the relationships between the characters, some of whom like each other, some of whom wish they were dead, and their motivation and why they've decided to actually come along on this heist, and what having that money will mean to them. I'm going to start by saying one of the reasons why I love Six of Crows so much is because I've never read anything like heisty before. I've never even watched like the Ocean's movies. So going into it, I didn't know whether it would be my thing, although I did know I'd like it, I just didn't know how much I'd like it, but I didn't expect to come out of it utterly obsessed. I think what I liked so much about the first book is that it's so different to the usual YA fantasy I read. So a lot of YA fantasy is kind of romance based. There's a lot of romance plotline. It's usually like very specific tropes. You get your love triangles, you've got usually some sort of like enemies to lovers thing going on, and there's always very specific characters. So you always have your main protagonist who's usually slightly annoying in some way and is obsessed with doing the greater good. Like, everything revolves around, we have to do the right thing, which is like great in ways, but then in other ways it gets kind of annoying. And then you always have the love interest who's like just 90% six-pack and as rude as anything, but it's fine because he's got a six-pack, and the whole book's just the 2 of them like brooding and angsting for each other. And that's why I like this book so much, because it wasn't like that. Yes, there was a bit of brooding and there was a bit of angsting, but it's very much like downplayed. You very rarely see it. And as someone who's never really that bothered about the romance between the main characters, I really like that. Although I will say, I think because it was downplayed, I found that I really did care about the romance plot lines in the book, which was nice because it wasn't always shoved in my face all the time. a big thing in YA is that they feel the need to shove the romance down your throat at every possible opportunity, and they didn't with this. It was very much a subplot that appeared every now and then, and it was done in a way that was just massively respectful because it was so different to the usual. But yeah, there was no greater good in this. Yes, the point in Six of Crows is that they rescue this man who is believed to be the person who can make this drug called Jodaparem, which is like basically taking over all the Grisha and turning them mad, and it's going to like crash the economy and people are going to die. So in that side of things, yes, they are trying to do something for the greater good, but at no point do you really hear any of the characters be like, we have to break into this place so we can save this man and save the world. Like, the point of the whole thing is, if we break into this place, we get lots of money. That is their motivation the whole way through, even when they're like dying, or they're like probably going to die. At no point is anybody like, but we're doing it for the good of the people. It's always like, but I really want money. And I just really like that, the kind of change in motivation from the usual, especially because quite often when the greater good is the motivation, there's nothing else there. You never find out why the characters are so obsessed with saving the world. It's just kind of like assumed that as good people they want to save the world, which isn't necessarily realistic. So I did very much like Leigh Bardugo's attempt to show these characters as more realistic and less like everything has to be great, we have to save everybody, and more just like the kind of motivation and the kind of things that real people want, even if people aren't necessarily willing to admit it. And I just thought it was really nice to see that change. I will say, when I started reading it, I didn't really know what I think of it, because as with the majority of fantasy books, there's like a new map and a new world and a new language to learn. And I not long finished Throne of Glass going into this, which like maps everywhere and new words everywhere, and it took me all 7 books to get my head around just their continent. So then I went from that into this, and then I opened it and I was like, oh, there's 2 maps, I have to learn 2 maps, and I was a bit concerned about that because I'm so naff at learning maps. And then of course there's new words in there. I believe a lot of it's inspired by the Dutch language, so there was a lot of new words being thrown in, and then of course you had the sort of magical system to learn, which I still don't particularly have my head around. I think I understand what's going on, but I had to keep flicking back a lot, which I'm used to doing, but after reading 7 Throne of Glass books, it was quite a bit. But I did eventually get through it. You know, there's only 2 books, so I can't sit here and be like, yeah, and now I know the whole map off by heart, because I don't. But it definitely became easier, and it was easier overall than I was expecting it to be, and in the end it didn't really hinder my reading. I think my favourite scene overall from book 1 was definitely the scene where Jesper, Inej and Wylan break out of the ice court in a tank through the wall, because the whole book's kind of very actiony, there's lots of things happening, but that moment I was like, here we go. As soon as the tank was mentioned, I was like, we're getting a tank scene, they're gonna break out in a tank. Just the image of them breaking through the wall in a tank and then just riding through the like ice countryside, I guess, with this banner behind them that just says Fjordamite. It was such a brilliant scene, and I actually put the book down and was like, this is why I read. For just really great action scenes like this. And when the TV show happens, I know it's like a mix of like several series, I think, at this point, I really hope that's a scene that makes it in. Moving on to the second book in the duology, which is Crooked Kingdom. This, I think, was my least favourite, definitely out of the 2, mainly because I found it a bit confusing, which is why I'm a little hesitant to try and explain the plot. Basically, at the end of the first book, they manage to break the man out of the ice court and they go to retrieve their money, at which point Jan van Eyck, who is the person who sent them to the ice court in the first place, tells them that he tricked them all basically and they're not getting any money, and he's just going to take the guy and kill them all and leave. And things happen, everything gets messy, and he ends up taking Inej captive. So the beginning of this book is them trying to save Inej, and Kaz basically deciding that he wants to go to war with Van Eyck. Like I said, it does get a bit confusing. There is a lot of different plans and jobs that happen, all in an attempt to basically end Van Eyck's career. They're trying to steal his money, they're trying to sabotage all of his businesses, and it's long and it goes on for a while, and there's so many different plans. It's basically a lot of failing one plan and then being like, it's okay, I've got another plan, then failing that plan and then being like, it's okay, now we have another plan. They must have like a strong 10 plans. We're just like plan A, plan B, plan C. It just keeps going on forever. All of this book takes place within the streets of Ketterdam, so I did have to try and learn that map, and that map's, it's a big, I'm right. I don't know if you can see that map, but like it's a lot. So I did instantly open it because that map wasn't in the first one, and I opened it and I saw that and I was like, oh dear. But I got my head around it eventually. I got my head around the bits I needed. See, I'd say that's my only negative point, like big negative point, is that personally I found Crooked Kingdom really confusing. That might just be because I'm stupid. I had a similar issue with other books where there's a lot of different plans going on, especially plans that are like government based or like centered around something to do with business. I really struggled to get my head around, and a lot of it was like investing in different things and sabotaging businesses and like finding ways to funnel money to other people, and I just had no idea what was going on. But I did enjoy just following it and seeing how things played out. I did think it was quite funny the way the plot escalated in Crooked Kingdom. We very quickly went from like just a few thugs trying to make money and trying to like rescue Inej to like everybody in the world and on the streets hates them. Like the change was very quick. I didn't particularly process it until the scene where they're like in Jesper's dad's hotel room and they're like, oh look, there's people on the streets and they're all looking for us, and I was like, wow, everybody hates you. And it happens very suddenly. And I did kind of like that escalation though, because it did kind of make everything seem more important, even though it wasn't as stressful as the sort of heist theme of the first one, I think, because that was like, oh hey, if we don't get out of here, we end up impaled on the wall. And I was very aware of that for the entire book, whereas in this one, I was like expecting them to get out of it eventually. And again, I may have not particularly been as stressed just because I didn't know what was happening a lot of the time. But what I liked about it is that as much as I didn't know what was happening, I still thoroughly enjoyed it. Sometimes I read books, and if I don't know exactly what's happening, I'm like, what's the point in being here? I'm like bored, I'm like confused, none of it makes sense, why am I reading this? Whereas with this, whether it was because I was already attached to the characters or not, I found myself just really enjoying it anyway and loving watching things unfold. And I think that's partly down to the fact that Leigh Bardugo has actually left things quite vague. So a lot of the time when they're explaining plans, even if you get it from Kaz's perspective, who's like kind of the one who comes up with all the plans, you don't actually find out the entire thing until it happens. So you think you know, going into like their next job, what's going to happen and how it's going to play out. And then it seems like everything's going wrong and all this other stuff's happening. And then it turns out that that was actually part of the plan. So you're always on your toes. Like at no point do you actually know what's happening. And so it's quite a stressful read, but like in a good way, because you don't want to know going into it what's going to happen. And I did like that everything wasn't just explained to the reader, things were left to shock you as well. Another thing I was really happy with in this, that again I will probably touch on more when I talk about the characters, is the way that the main romance was dealt with. So basically, in book one, it's kind of slightly hinted at that there's something brewing between two of the main characters, Inej and Kaz. And going into book two, I was a bit concerned about what it would mean for them as characters. At a point in book one, there's a conversation between them on a boat in which Inej says that basically she wants Kaz without armour. And I was a bit concerned that they were going to completely erase all of his character in book two so the two of them could be together. I could sort of see it kind of on the horizon and I was really concerned. Basically, if you haven't read the book, a lot of Kaz's story is that he absolutely hates physical contact because of something that happened when he was a child. And the whole story kind of revolves around this thing of like, why does Kaz wear gloves? And then it's revealed to be that. And then throughout his perspective, it comes up a lot. And that's a big issue between him and Inej. He doesn't actually think that he could be with her because of this massive fear of his. And I've seen so many times in books where they take someone's like emotional or mental struggles and then they get rid of it, and that's supposed to be their character development. It's like character at the beginning of a story is anxious, but by the end, oh look, I don't have anxiety anymore. Wow, character development. And it bothers me so much because that's not how that works, and that shouldn't be how it works in fiction. And so I was a little concerned going into Crooked Kingdom that by the end it was going to be like, gasp, look, I'm fine, I can touch people, it's totally cool, character development. And I was so happy when I read it and that wasn't the case. Yes, things developed, but it was taken very slowly and in a realistic way. And I was so happy about that. And the same on Inej's side as well. She has similar issues with her past, and it was dealt with just in a way that I could respect. It wasn't like, wow, I'm over my trauma now. Woo. It was like actually dealt with in a realistic way, and so I'm just so thankful for that because that was a big worry of mine going into this book. I'd say my favourite scene from this book, which now being able to actually go on social media and talk about it, I've noticed it seems to be a lot of people's favourite scene, is definitely the bit in the slat when Kaz is just fighting every other member of the gang and he's just descending the stairs at quite a dramatic pace and they're all just like throwing themselves at him. And I would say that was definitely one of the most dramatic scenes, and it was funny, but it was also really good to read. I was fairly certain there's a bit beforehand where he's like, oh, well, if I'm going to die, I might as well go in style. And I was like, I don't know what's about to happen, but I know it's going to be dramatic. And it was, but it was just so funny at the same time, and like stressful, but I found myself laughing anyway, just because the kind of image that was built, like the mental image of all these people just throwing themselves at him and just being battered out of the way, was just so funny. And I was also really, really happy with the end. I was a bit concerned as I was getting close to the end. You know, when you're like really close to the end, like you can see you don't have much left to read, but like things are still happening and they're still bad. And I was like, oh no, how's this gonna end? But it was a happy ending, and I was so happy it was a happy ending. And it wasn't even like too far out of reality. Sometimes books end and it all escalates very quickly, so it's like character who had nothing suddenly owns the world at the end, and you're kind of like, how did we get here? But it felt realistic for the characters, you know, like Kaz just returned to his job, Wylan had his house back, Jesper managed to pay off his debts. I think the biggest one that was quite sudden was definitely Inej meeting her parents again, but I was so glad that happened. One thing I will say I didn't like about the end is that we were robbed of actually seeing her reunite with her parents. It like led up as if we were going to get it and we were going to get that scene, and then it just cut off and was like Pekka Rollins, and I was like, no. that was the one thing that irked me a little bit, is that we didn't get that moment. But it did end happily, and I was so glad that it ended the way it did. So that's like a brief overview of my opinions on the two separate books. And then we're going to talk about the characters. So characters for me always mean a lot. Characters often mean more than the plot for me. If I like the characters, I can read it. If I like the plot but I don't like the characters, then I really struggle. But I was quite happy with the fact that I actually liked all the characters. One thing that I thought worked in this is that they all have their own backstories and motivations. There isn't one of the 6 main characters that I felt I didn't understand properly. They all have their own backstories going on, and they're all quite detailed, so you really feel like you know all of the characters. And also they're all flawed, which I thought was great. There wasn't any characters who were just like perfect in every way and always do the right thing. It was like they all had flaws, and they all knew that, and they all dealt with that. And it wasn't even as if some of them were like, gasp, I'm a bad person. Some of them were like, yeah, I'm like kind of a crap human being, but who cares? And I just really like that in the way that was shown throughout their perspectives, but also from the eyes of other people. I'm going to apologise in advance if I pronounce any names wrong, but I don't tend to check pronunciation guides that much when I read, and then if I check them afterwards and realise that I've been pronouncing something slightly wrong, I just kind of live with it. I don't make too much of a conscious effort to change it, because I think once you start saying something a certain way, it's difficult. The only name I can think of that I've made a conscious effort to change after reading was definitely Aelin Galathinius, which I pronounce as Galathinus for the entire series. And then somebody was like, it's Galathinius, and I was like, oh. So I'm literally going to apologise in advance. Please don't comment like, this is how you pronounce it, because I know. I probably know at least. If it was something big, then I'd have made a conscious effort to change it by now. So we'll start with Inej and her story. So Inej is a Sulu girl who I believe grew up in Ravka with her family, and they were acrobats. They worked with a circus, I believe, and they travelled. And when she was 14, she was taken by a slaver ship and sold to a pleasure house in Kerch, which is the main country that the story takes place in. So when the story starts, Inej is working with Kaz's gang, the Dregs, and she's basically a character called the Wraith. She's sort of like their spider, as it's referred to, but she kind of has a very assassin vibe. She's a spy for them. She goes and finds information for others because she's super quiet and nobody knows she's there. And I really liked that part of her personality, the fact that she just disappears. There's full scenes where she's just there 1 minute and then gone the next. And especially when you see it from her perspective, in the way that she has a lot of inner turmoil going on surrounding her job. Because sometimes you'll hear her talking and she hates the fact that she's killed people, she hates the fact that this is the life she's come to live, but then there's other times where she's like, yeah, I'm dangerous, and I just love that, just the fact that there's certain parts to it that she actually enjoys, even though there's still bits that she doesn't like. And I think that's another very realistic way to look at it, because nothing's ever black and white, so it makes complete sense to like certain bits of yourself but also hate certain bits of yourself. Inej's motivation kind of changes throughout the story, I found. At first, she sort of finds herself going on this heist for, like, particularly no reason. I think there's even a bit in it where she's like, why am I here? Like, the entire thing kind of happens because she feels like she owes Kaz, or she feels like she wants to be with Kaz. But then, as the story progresses, she decides that she wants to become a sailor. She wants to learn how to sail a boat, and she wants to go out and she wants to hunt slavers. And once she decides on this and that becomes her motivation, you almost see something switch in her and she becomes so much more ambitious. She's definitely a character who turns her weaknesses into strengths, which is another thing that I really like. She has a horrible backstory, but she almost uses it to fuel her and get what she wants out of life. You know, the entire thing with wanting to hunt slavers comes from her past, and the way it's all used and put into something that she can actually make a life out of, I thought was really good. And you very much see her as a strong character throughout, rather than being shown as a weak character with some trauma. That's not like all of her personality. It's like this is something she deals with, but it makes her into a stronger person. And I was very happy that we saw it from that angle. Another thing that I really liked about Inedge is the fact that she doesn't like have time for Kaz. Like, she does, but she also doesn't. In it, it's quite funny. There's full bits where she's like, 1 minute she's like, oh, I'll go do this because, like, Kaz wants me to. But then at the same time, she makes it quite clear that she's not willing to wait around for him. More than once, she either mentions to his face or sort of to herself from her perspective that she does not have time to stand and wait around for him to just get over his issues. She has things to be doing. And I thought that was really respectful because, like I mentioned quite often in YA, the female character's kind of like, he's just so great, I'm just going to give up my life for him. And I love the fact that she doesn't. She's very much like, if you're not going to be what I want you to be, and I'm not going to get a relationship out of this that is fulfilling for me, then I don't want it. And we don't see that very often, and especially the fact that it was done in like an almost polite way. Like, she wasn't rude about it. It was done in a respectful way, but also in a way that was correct for her, I thought was really great. Moving on to Jesper. At the beginning of the book, I was fully expecting Jesper to be my favourite, and I'd say he's probably like maybe my second or third favourite. And that's just because he's really funny. Like, I kind of went into the book expecting them all to be really serious characters, but they're not. Like, some of them have really incredible senses of humour, especially for the situations they find themselves in, and Jesper is definitely one of those characters. So he has the title throughout of Sharpshooter because he's incredibly good with guns. He grew up on a farm in Novi Zem with his father and mother until his mother died when he was young. I think he was like 10-ish. At which point, it's decided that he should very much keep his powers to himself. So when we join Jesper in the story, he is also working for the Dregs, and this is partly because he was supposed to go to university and instead spent all of his money gambling and just ended up in with the wrong crowds. We see Jesper's issues with gambling come up a lot. In fact, it's a theme that comes up quite often, even not necessarily in terms of gambling as in actual money gambling. We see him making a lot of risky decisions just off the fact that, you know, it could go wrong, and that in itself is a gamble. I like the fact that we see it come up throughout. It's not just something that's mentioned at the beginning, it's definitely something he deals with throughout the book. Another thing we see a lot of in Jesper is this energy he has that just seems to like never end. Everybody mentions the fact that he's always bouncing, he's always moving, he just never stops, he's always a very animated person. And I really like the way that was incorporated into the end of his story when it came out that because he's not been using his power as a fabricator, he maybe kind of hoarding all of this energy, and it's just kind of showing itself in his energy and also in his like amazing talent with a gun. I also like the way that Jesper's struggles with being a Grisha was shown throughout this. It's very much shown in the books that the Grisha versus the people who don't have powers is sort of like an imbalance. And so we see a lot from his perspective of him talking about how he never wanted to mention it because he knew that he'd be hunted and he didn't want to face any sort of prejudice because he's a Grisha. And I think showing that throughout was a really nice thing to include and a very interesting thing to include, especially when compared to some of the other Grisha characters who were like very proud of the fact they're Grisha. I also really enjoyed Jesper's subplot with his father, Combe. That was something that I wasn't expecting, but when it appeared, it was really good, and it was very stressful. As soon as in the second book they were like, oh, Jesper's father's here, I was like, oh dear. And I like the fact that the entire subplot always kept me on my toes because you never really knew where it was going to go. Combe was very much shown as this kind character, and so you did feel bad for him, but you also felt bad for Jesper, and then watching them clash but also make up because at the end of the day their family was really interesting to watch, and just the way that their relationship kind of progressed and the sort of roller coaster that it was throughout Crooked Kingdom. But I would say my favourite bit about Jesper was definitely his humour and his like weird priorities. There were so many scenes where they were like being shot at and they were about to die, and everybody else was like, gasp, this is horrible, and then Jesper was like, yay, death. And I thought that was just great. every moment where he was like, wow, I really wish I was being shot at, was like just so absurd but also so funny. And I thought it was definitely a way to incorporate his personality and his whole thing with gambling and his love for adrenaline and risk with sort of these other aspects. And it just never failed to make me laugh every time they were in a horrible situation and he was like happy about it. In the beginning, Wylan is shown to be quite a naive boy. He is the son of Vanek, as in the Vanek who they're all trying to best throughout the stories. And he's very much shown as quite pompous and privileged and naive, as if he's just this posh boy who's just decided he doesn't want to live at home anymore and ended up in the barrel. But as the story progresses, we see that that's not actually Wylan at all, and I thought that was done in a very clever way. It very much makes you judge him in the beginning and then just change your judgment entirely as the story continues, to the point where I still found myself underestimating him, like at the end of Crooked Kingdom. Wylan is in many ways noticeably less flawed than the other characters. He's done a lot less bad things than the other characters. He's grown up in this rich household for a very long time until his father kicked him out, basically tried to have him killed, and he ended up working in the barrel, and that's how he fell in with the dregs. And he's been there not that long, I believe, and so he hasn't really done anything bad. When we find Wylan, he's kind of the only character who still has some form of decency about him when it comes to morals, and you can very much see the judgment from the other characters when it comes to that. There's a lot of jokes about him like playing the flute, which continue throughout the whole series, and just like little things, and the way it's very much shown that they expect less of him because he's so different to them, and that very much translates into the reader's perspective of Wylan. And I think that is the main thing about his character that I really liked, was the fact that because this judgment was built so early, I couldn't like get over it, even when I was like, oh, he's not that. Well, you know, when his backstory started coming out and you found out more about him. But even right at the end, because of this initial judgment, I was still underestimating him. There's a scene at the end where he's being like beaten, like tortured, but it's part of a plan. But when you read it, you don't know it's part of a plan. And the way it translates is that he's hit like twice and then just spills everything. And I was like, typical Wylan, couldn't even last a moment. And then you find out later on that actually they hit him for a while and it was all part of a plan, and he was supposed to give up very specific information, and that he took the beating for a lot longer than he needed to. And even then I was like, oh wow, I just completely underestimated him as a character. And it's something that you find yourself doing with him over and over again because of the way that you're supposed to form this initial judgment of him. And I thought that was really clever on Leigh Bardugo's side for building him like that as a character. But I very much liked how it was kept soft. The only time it was really mentioned a lot by other characters was when they were talking about how good they were for each other. And I just really thought that was quite cute. And I can't really go through this entire thing without mentioning the scene where Jesper kissed Kawhi. Like, I screamed. What even was that? And just the way their relationship was built throughout the thing, so slowly, like all of the relationships were in these books, but in a way that was still respectful and still cute without being jammed down your throat every 5 seconds. I really loved, and I was so glad that they ended up happy at the end. Again, touching on the theme that I mentioned earlier of having to fix characters' problems for them to develop, one thing I was a bit concerned about was that Wylan was going to suddenly know how to read in book 2. It was going to end, and he was going to be like, gasp, it's a miracle, words, and thankfully that didn't happen either, and I was super happy about that because I've seen it happen so many times. And I think it's definitely another thing that, like with Inej, it's something that is a weakness for him, but it's also shown as a strength. Kaz says something to it at some point, I can't remember the exact quote, but he basically talks about how our real weaknesses are us being afraid that our actual weaknesses will be seen by someone else. And throughout it, we see Wylan struggle a lot with the fact he can't read. It comes up a lot with him talking about how he could never be a businessman and he could never be the good son of a businessman because he can't read. But then we also see it shown as a strength, especially towards the end when he's talking about how he can listen to things and then just repeat them because he remembers them as a song, which is something he does basically to like get himself and everyone else out of trouble at the end. And little touches like that, turning weaknesses into strengths, is something that I really liked about this book and also about specifically the characters. Next we have Nina. Nina is a Ravkan soldier. She was part of their army, which I believe is what the series beforehand is set in. I've never read the Grisha trilogy. And she ends up on a ship to Fjerda with all of these other Grisha who are being like witch hunted, I guess, and the ship crashes and her and Matthias end up having to save each other, and then they end up stranded in the cold, and then they end up on a boat to Ketterdam, and then Nina finds herself alone. And when we meet her, she is working in another one of the pleasure houses, but she works in emotional welfare, I guess. People come to see her and she helps like ease feelings of grief or stress or that kind of thing. And she's kind of working with the dregs. She does some jobs for them. In the first book, a lot of Nina wanting to like work with the dregs, and especially on the heist, is because it involves breaking Matthias out of jail. And after that, we very quickly see their relationship change, which I thought was like really funny. Just the fact that you go into it expecting them to break him out and them to be like, oh, we love each other so much, and instead they just straight up hate each other for like the good part of the book. Throughout it, we get to see more of Nina, we get to see more of her backstory and also how she deals with being a Grisha. She's very much a character who's proud of who she is. She's grown up learning how to use her powers, and it's something that she holds dear to her, and it's something that she sees as a very large part of her personality and her as a person. And I thought that contrast between her being proud of being Grisha and Jesper trying to hide the fact that he's Grisha worked very well, because you get to see just how that affects people depending on how they were brought up and how they were brought up to see the Grisha world. I think my favourite thing though about Nina was definitely just her character and how she was built to be. So Nina is very much a character who's proud of herself. She definitely holds herself to a high standard, and I really like that. It's not that often that you see female characters in YA who actually like themselves and are actually pretty chill with who they are as a person, especially as Nina's described as not being like the super skinny character that a lot of people expect these kind of female characters to be. She talks a lot about her love for food and waffles in particular, which I've never had a waffle, maybe I'm just going to have to try a waffle now. And kind of having this part of her personality and also her past, and the fact that she still very much likes herself and is very confident, I thought was a really good way to show her, even if we also see the little dips in her confidence as the story goes on. But she kind of works around this and is very much somebody that the other characters see as this big, loud personality who just makes everybody happy. And it was very nice to see a character like that. Again, moving swiftly on because I'm running out of time, but I've just got so much to say. Next is Matthias. I will say I didn't like Matthias at first. Like, I really didn't like him. If I'm honest, he reminded me a lot of Kale Westfall, and I just don't have time for Kale Westfall. And I was a bit meh about that, but I actually think you weren't supposed to like him at the beginning, because a lot of his personality and his character development is him kind of becoming a better person, I guess. Matthias spent a good portion of his life working for the Driscoll, who are sort of a government team, I believe, of soldiers who work for Fjorda, and a big part of their job is hunting Grisha. So he's very much been raised on these beliefs about Grisha and Grisha magic, which is that it's bad and it's unnatural and that they are all monsters and creatures who deserve to die. Which, of course, is a massive conflict within his personality when he meets Nina and they, like, become a thing. And you see a lot from his perspective of him kind of wanting to be with her, but then this sort of innate part of his mind telling him that he can't because it's unnatural and she's a monster and she should die. So a large part of his story from his perspective is him trying to get over this, and we do see that change a lot throughout the story. Towards the end, we sort of see him accepting the Grisha, especially as he works with Kauai and Jesper at one point, and we see him sort of realising through that actually Grisha magic can be something entirely different. But one thing I did enjoy was the fact that he doesn't just get over it. There's no point where he's suddenly like, well, I was wrong, you're all great people. Like, he knows that they're good people, but he mentions time and time again that there's still this voice in the back of his head telling him that he should be afraid and he should be, like, trying to kill them because of what he's been taught. And I thought that was a very good reflection of a lot of actual society, in the way that people over the years have been believed to think a certain thing, and now that people are trying to change their views to something else, as much as you can try, there is always sometimes this voice, I guess, that's telling you something otherwise, and a lot of human nature is trying to fight against this voice. And I think showing that and the reality of that, of him believing this thing and just having to fight to ignore this other voice in the back of his head, was a really good way to do it. Like I said, Matthias was my least favourite, just because I thought he was a bit boring. He was kind of the closest we had to, like, the sort of usual YA love interest, and he was a bit broody, and he was a bit Kale Westfall-y, and yeah, it was a bit like lawful good, and I'm not usually a lawful good person. But again, as much as he was my least favourite, I definitely didn't dislike him. Like, I did at first, but by, like, book 2, I was like, actually, you're okay. And I just like that, and the fact that none of the main 6 characters did I absolutely hate, because there's usually at least one character who I'm like, please take a long walk off a shop here, but there wasn't. Like, I actually liked them all. And wrapping up my feeling on all of the characters, Kaz. I love Kaz Brekker so much. I didn't go into this expecting to come out with a new favourite character. And I did, and it just happened to be the Bastard of the Barrel, of all people. I think what it was is I always like characters that are in some way relatable, and there was a lot about Kaz that I haven't seen in a character before. Mainly, as I touched on before, his whole phobia against like skin-on-skin contact. That is something that I've never seen in a character before, and as someone who struggles with sensory issues myself and sometimes finds like physical contact absolutely horrible, it was like awesome to see that in a character and to actually read about a character with that problem, which is another reason why I was so concerned that they were going to just erase it for character development. And the fact that they didn't, and it was something that was worked with throughout, was just really nice to see. Another thing I liked about Kaz is that as much as he was kind of like the broody asshole of the group, he was also like nice, but in his own way. Like, he made a very good effort to show that he doesn't care about anyone, but then he also did things that very much contradicted that. And the way that they all sort of like tease him playfully throughout with this theme of like, oh yeah, Kaz hates us all, totally. And I very much like the fact that he was like the opposite of the usual YA love interest. There was no shirtless scenes, there was no like constant, oh my god, Kaz, you're so beautiful. Like, the most we saw of that was actually just people taking the mick out of his haircut. And I really liked the fact that he was a character who was very suited and booted, very sort of respectful of himself. Maybe not as much other people, but definitely of himself, who also had these struggles that weren't just like daddy issues as they usually are. I thought was really different to what we usually see, and I like massively enjoyed that, and just the fact that it was so different, and also there wasn't a love triangle, which just makes everything 10 times better. But seeing a character like that who was that little bit different was just like completely not what I was expecting. So yeah, Kaz very quickly became like maybe like my third ever favourite character, which compared to the other two is quite different because they're very different characters. But it was really nice to be able to see that side of a character and to actually be able to relate in an odd way, like of all the characters to relate to. It was nice to have that and to actually feel like you can connect with a character. I think everybody's always looking for that. You know, that's why we have diversity in books, is so everybody feels like they're included, everybody feels like they can see themselves, and it was really nice to actually have that for once for myself. Also, of course, we have to give a shout out to all of his dramatic quotes throughout the entire series. Every time I go on Tumblr now, because I've finally unfiltered the tags, all I see is all these dramatic quotes, and like, he's just such a dramatic bitch, and I love it so much. Like, he has an aesthetic and he sticks to it. Right, that is it for the characters overall, but I will do a very quick overall summary because I'm still ranting. Do you know how long this video is? And I'm still ranting. So overall, I thought the plot was brilliant, especially the first one, with the way it was just focused on this heist, and it was unlike anything I've seen. I liked the intricacies of it, even if sometimes it kind of like confused me. I also massively enjoyed the characters. I'd say that overall they were my favourite part of the story because they're all so different and they're all so complex and they all have their own backstories and their own ambitions. And it was really nice to see separate motives throughout the different characters, because sometimes I find in books some of them are sort of forgotten about and there's sort of a focus on like 2 out of like 5 characters. Like I said at the beginning, I wasn't even expecting to do a review of this book. I thought that I'd just read them because they came out so long ago, nobody would want to watch it. So that's why I'm not really calling this a review. It will be labelled as a review, but it's more of just me ranting about how much I like this. I don't even think there was negative points. I think I said like 2 things that were slightly negative. This wasn't like an unbiased opinion in any way, because I just loved the book so much that I wanted a chance to rant about them. And as soon as I read them, I was like, well, I guess I've got to do a video on it now, so this is that. This is probably appallingly long because I've been talking forever. If you watch my Ghost of the Shadow Market video, you'll know that the resolution on it wasn't as good because it was about like 47 minutes long or something, because I just kept talking, and I'm really worried this is going to be the same, and I said that I wouldn't go over half an hour on videos anymore, so I'm going to apologise now if the camera quality on this is absolutely horrendous because the video's like 3 hours long. I've been filming forever. Yeah, I think I'm just going to end it there. I'm going to stop talking there. I will say very quickly that I'm very excited to read the Grisha trilogy. I haven't read them yet. I'm going to probably like either the end of this year or the beginning of next year. So I'm kind of all prepared before the TV show comes out. Yeah, I'm very excited for that. I'm also very excited to read King of Scars after that because I'm reading everything in the wrong order. There was so many spoilers in Crooked Kingdom, even though people told me there wasn't. But anyway. Thank you so much if you actually managed to make it to the end of whatever this has been. Please comment below if you've read Six of Crows so I can kind of rant at you. But other than that, thank you for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye!